All right. Welcome, everybody. This is a meeting of the CMAQ-TAP Project Selection Committee. My name is Doug Ferguson. I'm the chair. I am calling this meeting to order at 11:03. As permitted by the Governor's Disaster Declaration, the determination has been made that an in-person meeting is not practical or prudent for this committee. To ensure that this meeting is transparent as possible, we will be posting the meeting materials approximately 1 week in advance and providing a recording of this meeting listed on our website, and we'll take all votes by roll call. With that, John, will you call the roll?
Sure thing. If anyone is sitting in for a regular member, just state your name and when I call in the member's name. So Doug Ferguson, CMAP.
Present.
Darwin Burkhart, IEPA. Mark Pitstick, representing Transit.
Present.
Mayor Grasso.
This is Evan Walter, Village of Burr Ridge, sitting in for Mayor Grasso.
Thanks, Evan. Chris Schmidt, IDOT.
Present.
Chris Snyder, representing counties.
Actually, go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, Tom Rickard present. Yeah, I think that it needs to be corrected. I've been doing this for a few months.
Sorry, my apologies. Jeffrey Shriver, CDOT.
Here.
All right.
Great, thank you. So moving on to agenda changes and announcements. We don't have any agenda changes or announcements today. Is there any announcements from the committee? All right. Hearing none, we'll move on to approval of the minutes. Included in your meeting materials were the minutes from September 1st for your approval. Do I have a motion?
Tom Rickard moves.
Thank you, Tom. A second? Thanks, Mark. I think I saw your lips move saying second.
Mark Pitstick seconds.
Thank you. Any changes or discussion on the minutes as presented? All right, hearing none. John, can you call the roll for the minutes?
Sure thing. Darwin Burkhart. Mark Pitstick.
Aye.
Evan Walter.
Aye.
Chris Schmidt.
Aye.
Tom Rickard.
Aye.
And Jeffrey Shriver.
Aye.
You forgot me.
Doug Ferguson.
Aye. All right. The minutes are approved. Thank you. Moving on to the programming status sheets. Earlier this morning, I emailed programming status sheets out to the committee members. I will be posting those through the Legistar system later today. My apologies for their late timing. We are still working on these, trying to get something that can be produced by our ETIP database with all the information that's being requested. What's being shown is all the program funds. That does not include obligation amounts. However, nothing has been obligated to date in the month of October for the new federal fiscal year. So we'll still be working on these, but I wanted to get something out that at least showed where the projects had and the different funding by years for the committee to review. Any questions on those or comments? All right, hearing none. Moving on to the CMAQ program summary and obligation goal sheet. As many of you may have noticed, in federal fiscal year 23, there's an issue. The unobligated balance has exceeded the AC amount. So traditionally, we have used AC to overprogram in the program, but for those that may not be aware, so when funds are in AC status, that means a federal authorization has been received for that phase to move forward, but the actual federal funds are not obligated. So they don't come off our balance in FHWA's system, but they're still can proceed. IDOT at a later date, once a billing has occurred, will convert those AC funds to an actual obligation. So that's why we kind of use AC to overprogram to keep projects in line so that they can keep progressing and hopefully spend down. However, with the change of the federal fiscal year, we had several projects move forward late in federal fiscal year 2022 into 2023, and there were several AC conversions. So right now, the way it looks, and I'm just going to show kind of what our math is right now. We have approximately in the tip, there's a little over like 76.7 million, a little under 76.7 million that's over programmed. If we take off the AC amount, it gets us a little bit closer to being in line with fiscal constraint in the tip. But I also wanted to indicate that we've also got some project changes that have been requested at this meeting, so accounting for those. And in addition to that, we had already moved during carryover, we've moved some 23 line items out so that we could at least get closer to fiscal constraint, but those line items want to come back into the program. They weren't delayed projects. So we have a $68.6 million problem. I will add that staff is working on this and we've got some solutions. So just talking through some of those with you so that you know what we're doing and thinking. Back in October, we were notified by IDOT that they intend to give the programming authority for the carbon reduction program funds. So carbon reduction funds were a creation of IIJA, and there's a requirement that 65% of funds allocated to the states be distributed to urbanized areas. So, and with our amount that would be coming to Northeastern Illinois, IDOT has indicated that they're going to give us programming authority for that. Initially, we're still talking internally. We're still talking with IDOT. There's still some issues that we need to work out, like as far as timing is concerned. But my goal is to hopefully do a call for the carbon reduction funds as part of the CMAQ and TAP call for project and SDP shared fund. Do it as part of that call. We don't have all the details worked out. However, there is already funding that is sitting on the table from federal fiscal year 22 and 23 is already underway. So one of my ideas is to use those funds that are currently sitting on the table to swap out with CMAQ, existing CMAQ projects. The carbon reduction program and the CMAQ program closely align as far as project eligibility types are concerned, so we don't feel that there's going to be an issue with that. We could have the ability to, for the projects that we swap out, produce an estimate of GHG emissions that are reduced as part of that project, so that we can at least be in line with the program. And at the same point in time, spend down or get started on spending down those funds, because those funds are already on available as far as FHWA system is concerned. So it would be a benefit twofold to keep the carbon reduction program from falling behind and building an unobligated balance and helping us with our programming issue with CMAQ. Staff is also working with project implementers to identify projects that have remainders that can potentially be removed. Also, projects that have a line item that has reached its sunset and would be moved into deferral, so that could make funding available. We're also looking at bicycle facility projects that we could swap out TAP-L funds for. With IIJA, the funding for TAP-L more than doubled. So we actually have quite a bit of unprogrammed TAP-L funds that we could utilize on bicycle facility projects. And then we're also looking at projects that aren't going to be moving in 23 but have funds programmed there. So we're using the status update forms and also just checking in with sponsors to potentially move projects out of 23 into future years based upon what they need funding. So I know that was quite a bit, but are there any questions or comments on where we sit? I will say that this does have an impact on our next agenda item and the approval of the change request for CMAQ. So with that, any questions or comments?
I think those are all good recommendations to pursue, Doug, and sounds like you have a number of tools that should be able to address this in combination, right?
Yeah, I think part of the challenge is like with a meeting so close to the change in the federal fiscal year and just having the status reports all figured out from project sponsors. We're still collecting some from last quarter. So we've been a little delayed in coming up with a solution, but I think we can find a way to make it work. We will make it work.
Good.
Hey, Doug?
Yes.
Yeah, I guess the next item's really kind of where I want to understand what we have available and that kind of stuff. I mean, I recall, if I remember right, when I was looking at it, there were a lot of positive recommendations. This is not an emergency right now then to deal with this. You're going to come forward in the future with potential solutions?
Well, we'll be able to move stuff, move line items out of 23 that I think can accommodate maybe not all the requests, but some of them. And so how about we move on to the next agenda item, because that sounds like what we're wanting to talk about, the project change requests. So I'm going to have John go through the different requests. I would ask that we just take care of the TAP-L requests first and get those all out of the way before we jump into the CMAQ projects. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to John.
All right, so project sponsors requested consideration of changes to 9 projects or segments, and these include 6 CMAQ changes and 3 TAP-L changes, and as Doug said, we're going to tackle those TAP-L items first. The Illinois 59 bicycle and pedestrian overpass project, the sponsors are requesting a schedule change to move the funds from federal fiscal year 2026 to 2023. This is due to the project targeting a August 2023 construction letting that requires program TAP-L funds to be moved into 2023. So the project also has ITAP and shared funds for construction and construction engineering programmed in 2026. And this project also applied for an additional $1 million for construction as a part of the 2022 cycle 15 ITAP call for projects, which is currently being reviewed and scored. And then, so staff recommends approval of the requested schedule change for construction from 2026 to 2023. The next one, North Branch Trail connection from Caldwell to Ave to Bunker Hill Forest Reserve. Sponsors requesting an increase of $72,000 TAP-L for construction due to awarded bid exceeding the estimate, and staff recommends approval of the requested cost increase of $72,000 TAP-L for construction engineering. And the third and final TAP-L project, the Des Plaines River Trail from Toohey to North Ave, The sponsor is requesting a schedule change for construction and construction engineering from 2025 to 2023 for segment 4 of the project. And segment 4 of this project is on the January lighting. So staff recommends approval of the schedule change for construction and construction engineering funds from 2025 to 2023. So those are the 3 TAP L changes. Are there any questions on any of those?
Thanks, John. Are there any questions on those 3 TAP requests? If not, I would entertain a motion to approve those changes.
Rickert moves.
Thank you, Tom. Do I have a second?
It's 6 seconds.
Thank you, Mark. With that, John, would you mind calling the roll for those?
Absolutely. Mark Pitstick,
Aye.
Evan Walter,
Yes.
Chris Schmidt,
Aye.
Tom Rickert,
Aye.
Jeffrey Shriver, and Doug Ferguson.
Aye. All right, so the TAP-L changes passed. So now onto the CMAQ change requests. John, do you want to take those?
Sure thing. Yep. So again, there were 6 of these. I'll run through them, and if there are any questions, feel free to interject. So the first one is the Traffic Management Center, the ATMS added functions. So the sponsor is requesting a schedule change to move the funds from 2025 to 2023. And for this project, the sponsor has been working on it for the past 7 years, and that work contract has come to an end. And to start the next phase of work funded by CMAQ and reduce potential interruptions to the TMC system and build on to the ATMS functions, funds are going to be needed to keep the project moving forward. So staff recommends approval of the requested schedule change for implementation from 2025 to 2023. The next one is the Oakton Street multi-use path. The sponsor is requesting a cost increase of $267,000 from CMAQ for construction. And the reasoning for that was that phase 1 of construction went out to bid and the bids came in high. Staff's recommending approval of the requested cost increase in the amount of $267,000 CMAQ for construction on phase 1 of that construction phase. Next, we have I-55 from Pulaski Road to Weber Road and the I-90-94 Halstead Street to Roosevelt Road ramp metering. The sponsor requests a reinstatement of funds for the project and moving the funding from phase 2 engineering to construction for a total of $3,098,000 CMAQ in 2023. The sponsor has completed phase 2 engineering in-house and is prepared for the project to go for lighting. So staff is recommending approval of the reinstatement of $3,098,000 CMAQ for construction in 2023. And then we have the IL-19 Irving Park Road at Wise Road. Sponsors requesting a cost increase of $496,000 CMAQ based on the final engineering estimate. The project was re-ranked and it remained first among the 2018 to 2022 intersection projects. Staff's recommending approval of the schedule change for construction funds from 2025 to 2023. Next, we have the IL-38 at County Farm Road. Sponsor requests a cost increase of $11,312,000 in the schedule change for construction from federal fiscal year 2025 to 2026. So this is a project. So this project is part of a larger corridor project along IL-38 in the final stages of the corridor improvements. The proposed drainage for the 2 intersection improvements no longer meets design standards and is a part of the corridor study. It is revising all drainage and right away. And the project was re-ranked and it dropped from first to third among federal fiscal year 2022 to 2026 intersection improvement projects, which is below 2 projects that were not selected for funding. Staff recommends consideration of the cost increases and schedule change in the amount of $11,312,000 for construction funds from 2025 to 2026. And finally, we have the IL-64 Smart Corridor. The sponsors requesting a cost increase of $7,056,000 CMAQ for ITS work on the York Road to IL-50 segment. The phase 1 scope was very general to do ITS improvement in the corridor, and the scope was not clearly defined until phase 2 began. Phase 1 cost estimate was not detailed enough for an accurate cost. The project was re-ranked and it dropped from 3rd to 4th out of the 4 total projects among the 2020 to 2024 transit service and equipment projects, which was below 1 project that was not selected. Again, staff recommends consideration for the cost increase in the amount of $2,968,000 for construction and construction engineering, and a schedule change from 2023 to 2025. So Doug, you can go a little more into maybe the plan of action, but I believe for the IL-38 at County Farm and the IL-64 Smart Corridor, staff's recommending deferring, or not deferring, excuse me. I'm losing the word here. No, postponement. There we go. Postponement of the 2 CMAQ projects that are not time sensitive at the current moment and with the status of the program, and then approval of the contingent on staff being able to work those into the program for the other 4 CMAQ projects.
Yeah, so just to reiterate what John said, we would like to postpone the last 2 IDOT projects. We have a lot of questions as staff that weren't answered. They were submitted, so we're bringing them forward just to be like open, but we don't like where they're going. We think there's a lot of different questions that need to be answered that are not, as far as the level of cost increase is concerned on both of them, and what is coming with those different cost increases. So we would like to postpone those to at least the next meeting, if not longer. With the other 2, or the other, 4, we would like to have those approved pending staff being able to identify funding for programming in the TIP for those projects. We do feel that we can do this. We just didn't have enough time to get to that accomplished prior to the meeting. So with that, are there any questions or comments from the committee members?
Yeah, Doug, I have some comment. I agree with the recommendation to postpone those 2, especially on the IDOT Smart Corridor. I have 2 questions on that. One is, it was categorized, there's a mention here of transit service and equipment project. Is that really the category for that project?
Yeah, the way we evaluated the project was based upon improvements along that North Avenue corridor, being able to provide better accommodation for transit riders. It's not really a reconstruction or an ad lanes job. I mean, it's about like getting the corridor to function better for pedestrians and transit users.
Right. I'm familiar with some of the earlier planning work on that corridor, but there's another part of the corridor that's farther west. Is that also funded by CMAQ and categorized as a transit service and equipment?
Well, I think it was the entirety of it, like
okay.
saying further west than Smith and Coutts Road.
Yeah. Well, my comment is there's no transit on North Avenue west of York Road, so I'm not sure why that would be considered a transit service and facility equipment. I'm just wondering what happened there. I don't remember that being categorized that way.
Well, then I mean, this needs to be part of the discussion.
Yeah, when we revisit it. And the other is well, it's schedule change from 2023 to 25. Do you need to do that anyhow, to that part of it, just to kind of clear up some of the funding for 2023?
Yep.
Would that be helpful to approve that today?
Well, we don't need to approve that. Like, the ability to drop stuff back it has always been like, as staff, we've always kind of handled that. Like, I mean, if it's ready in 23, it would only be if they were trying to move funds forward that could affect the potential of other projects to move forward, or cost increases, or deferred projects being reinstated.
Right.
Okay. So just got to handle that administratively.
Okay. And yeah, I mean, I'm not opposed to the project overall. I remember being involved in it early. It came out of some of the east-west corridor studies, and sort of to do some work to help travel along the ID8 at 290 corridor. So I do know a lot about the project, but there is no transit west of York Road. So
okay,
all right, keep that in mind. That's all for me.
All right, thank you. Anybody else?
Tom, it seemed like you had some comments before that you wanted to.
Well, no, I guess I was trying to understand a little bit on the, and I thought since we will likely postpone those, that I could ask them in between our next meeting. But I was wondering a little bit how these cost increases occurred either through or during the phase one, or it looks like with the smart corridor it occurred in the phase two. It's just pretty significant. So I was just trying to figure out how that occurred in the phase one.
I had the same questions. So yeah.
And so does staff.
Well, I guess I would move the ones that staff is recommending, and as part of my motion, postpone the two till our next meeting or so. I mean, whenever it's appropriate, once those questions are asked, or we have a better understanding of those two projects.
Yeah, I agree. So thank you for that. Is that an official motion, Tom?
Yes, that's a motion.
Do I have a second?
I'll second. Pitstick will second.
Thank you, Mark. All right. Is there any further discussion before a vote?
Yeah, this is Chris Schmidt from IDOT. I just wanted to kind of throw out there that this is the first that I've heard of this. Doug, if there's any way that you can copy me on further communications with whoever you're asking for on this information, that would be nice. And then just sort of say that, if there's issues with communication and getting information from IDOT for amendments for CMAQ, please let me know. We have a former CMAP employee who is now the director of planning and programming, and I feel has got a pretty good relationship with the secretary, and issues like this, if they can be brought up a little bit beforehand, maybe we can resolve those. So that would be my comment.
Appreciate that, Chris.
Yeah.
And I just had one more question. I mean, I made a motion, and my apologies, but I still stand with the motion because I want to make sure that we're moving forward with these projects. And I'm assuming then again the staff is comfortable. I think Doug, you said this 2-3 minutes ago, that you're comfortable with the other projects moving forward, and that we'll be able to have the funds available.
Yeah. Okay. All right. With the motion on the table, John, can you call the roll for the vote?
Sure. Mark Pitstick.
Aye.
Evan Walter.
Yes.
Chris Schmidt.
Aye.
Tom Rickert.
Aye.
Jeffrey Shriver.
Aye.
And Doug Ferguson.
Aye. All right. So those changes pass pending staff making funding available in the TIP. Thank you. Moving on to program development. So we're still intending to do a call for projects come in January. And following up on the STP Project Selection Committee, where Kama presented the preliminary engineering requirements, she's going to give the same presentation to you. So apologies to those who sat through it once. Hopefully you'll have a better understanding. Kama.
Thank you, Doug. Good morning, everybody. As you'll recall, in September, staff did propose some options for relaxing the requirement for phase 1 engineering to be substantially complete in order to apply for funding, and instead limiting the programming and/or cost increases based on how far along a project is with preliminary engineering. Like the STP Project Selection Committee, this committee did not want to limit scheduling flexibility and instead favored limiting future cost increases or limiting the phases eligible for funding. This committee also suggested that the options that staff put forth in September were not mutually exclusive. Therefore, staff is recommending a combination of what were previously presented as options 1 and options 3, as well as the reassessment provision that was suggested with option 2. If you can go to that summary slide, Doug. In summary, the recommendation is to define the degrees of completion for preliminary engineering and to accept applications for any project that has preliminary engineering underway. Based on the degree of completion, future cost increases and phases eligible for funding will be limited. Finally, for projects that were less complete, staff recommends reassessing the project made by those projects prior to the next subsequent call cycle and requiring reapplication if those projects have not reached at least nearly complete status. The limits proposed, which are shown in detail on the next slide, are the same as those presented in options 1 and 3 at our last meeting. So just to review those quickly, for projects with completed preliminary engineering, there would be no limits on phases eligible for funding, and cost increases of up to 100% of the initially programmed amount for each phase would be considered. For nearly complete projects, all phases would be eligible for funding, but design or phase 2 engineering would not be eligible for cost increases, and cost increase consideration for land acquisition and construction would be limited to 50% of the initially programmed amount. For substantially complete projects, design engineering would not be eligible for funding, but land acquisition and construction would be. Land acquisition would not be eligible for cost increases, but cost increases of up to 25% would be able to be considered for construction. If preliminary engineering is underway, only construction would be eligible for funding, and no future cost increases would be considered. And if engineering has not started, the project would not be eligible for funding consideration at all. That said, none of these restrictions would apply to applications that are for preliminary engineering funding only from our cohort 4 communities. And the restrictions on cost increases are intended to be applied by phase and to be cumulative. So a sponsor could not request 100% cost increase in December and then request another 100% cost increase in July. Both the percentage and dollar amounts allowable would be included in award letters just so that sponsors are clear up front what those limits would be. The restrictions on cost increases would also not preclude a sponsor from applying for additional funding through a subsequent call for projects where they would just be treated as a new application. So on the next slide are the full definitions of the degrees of completion. The full definitions are included in the memo, and then high-level highlights are here on the slide. Within the memo, we've also identified attachments that would be required to be submitted with the applications to demonstrate that each degree has been reached for preliminary engineering. With these attachments, it's staff's hope that verification from IDOT and FTA will not be needed. So, staff should be able to look at a design approval letter and say, yes, you received your design approval, which should significantly reduce the back and forth with IDOT at the time of application. So to be complete, highway projects would need to have their design approval, and transit projects would need a record of decision or finding of no significant impacts. Nearly complete would mean a final project development report has been submitted for signatures at IDOT, or that a transit project is a categorical exclusion with no unusual circumstances documented. Substantially complete for transit means a draft EIS or environmental assessment or required environmental studies for a CE would be complete. For highways, it would mean a preliminary PDR has been submitted and that the Bureau of Design and Environment has completed environmental survey request reviews. Underway for transit means that an EIS or EA scoping is complete or that environmental studies for a categorical exclusion are in draft status. For highways, underway would mean that a federal coordination meeting had been held, there's federal concurrence on the environmental processing, and that the Bureau of Design and Environment review of the ESR has begun. So in the discussion last meeting, underway was defined as those ESR results being completed, and that was an error. It should be begun to be underway, not completed. So within the application workbook, space will also be provided for applicants to explain unusual circumstances that need to be considered when determining the degree of completion of preliminary engineering. So, flexibility and good judgment are the intention here. There are unusual circumstances that may elevate a project's completion status. So on the next slide again is a summary of the recommendation. Earlier this morning, Doug mentioned the STP Project Selection Committee did hear this proposal, and the committee did support this proposal and incorporated it into the draft application booklet for the upcoming call for projects. However, that decision this morning doesn't preclude discussion here, and if this committee is not in agreement with the STP Project Selection Committee, staff would definitely convene a joint meeting so that we could reach consensus between the two committees. But just based on the conversation at your last meeting, I think both committees are well in the same place. And so with that, I think I'll stop and ask for questions or discussion from the committee.
Thank you, Kama. Does anybody have any questions or comments on the proposal? I would add that we are asking for approval of this change to be included with the CMAQ and TAP call for projects today. Obviously, if we're not at that point, we can delay that till December, but our goal would be to get this approved today as part of the application. Yes, Mark.
Yeah, Doug, thanks. And Kama, thank you. I think this is good shape. I know we've talked about it a couple times, and I appreciate the work, and I hope that you guys can work with this. It's not too complicated. I'm in general support of it, although and the stuff you have in the slides today was fine, but I'm looking in particular at the committee memo and the transit section, and there's some wording in the top couple categories of complete or substantially complete that is different than the underway, and I think we need to tweak that a little bit because there's projects that just don't have record of decisions or go through they're kind of obvious categorical exclusions that you're not going to have any documentation from FTA or record of decisions. So I think maybe you need to add some language, kind of like what you have in that bottom category into the top. So the projects I'm familiar with didn't do any of that stuff. So, do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, that makes sense. And apologies, it was the intention to include all those CE caveats into the.
Yeah. Put some caveats in the top things. I don't know, maybe there's a different way to do it, but the ones that are obvious categorical exclusions, they're not going to have any documentation required probably. Yeah,
that makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah, and on the highway side, it's similar in that there's no report for phase one. On the highway side for a categorical exclusion, it's just a single form, and so the same thing would apply on the highway side there. So we'll beef up that language.
Okay, great.
Any other questions or comments for Kama? Well, I will add that we're we're trying to make this work for everybody. And obviously, we need to make sure that projects are truly underway, where we get better cost estimates and make sure that projects are going to be timely and going forward. There's no guarantees. We understand that. But hopefully this will work with sponsors that found it a little bit more challenging or difficult to get projects underway. So with that, I would look for a motion to approve this change to the application materials for the next upcoming call.
I'll make a motion that approve this proposal with the presumption that staff will address the comments I had regarding the obvious categorical exclusions on both the transit side and the highway side.
Do I have a second?
Rickard will second. Oh, sorry, Chris.
Oh, that doesn't matter either way.
All right. Before we do a roll call vote, is there any more discussion or questions? All right, hearing none. John, will you call the roll?
Sure. So Mark Pitstick,
Aye.
Evan Walter,
Aye.
Chris Schmidt,
Aye.
Tom Rickert,
Aye.
Jeffrey Shriver, and Doug Ferguson.
Aye. All right. The preliminary engineering passes. Moving on, scoring methodology, equity criteria. At your June meeting, we discussed as a committee making potential changes to the inclusive growth score by including the USDOT disadvantaged community as a criteria, which is created by the Federal Justice 40 initiative. At that time, we were just being preliminary in there and assuming that CMAQ and TAP would eventually fall under the Justice 40 initiative. In August, USDOT added both programs to the Justice 40 initiative, which is requiring the implementation of the implementation of funds for infrastructure improvements, that 40% should be in what the USDOT considers a disadvantaged community. So we feel that we're moving in the right direction on adding this to the scoring criteria. And I just want to go over some of what we're proposing. However, I will add that we may want to take a pause between posting the materials. Additional information was made available to staff that maybe we're not quite ready for prime time. But I would say still to go through it and discuss it, and we can maybe set ourselves up for the December meeting and a potential change. So the staff recommendation is to add a disadvantaged community criteria, which would be combined with the inclusive growth score to create an equity score. It would be done on a 20-point basis with 10 points coming from disadvantaged community and 10 from inclusive growth. For those that may not remember, the inclusive growth looks at persons of color under the poverty line and their use of an existing system. So either an existing roadway or existing rail network. To get an estimate of those that may benefit by the proposed improvement. With the disadvantaged community criteria, the USDOT has created what they call disadvantaged categories. Those categories include transportation access, health, environment, economic resilience, and equity. So it scores to, I believe it's the 50th percentile for each of those areas. And basically using census tracts indicates whether it meets the requirement of being a disadvantaged community or not. So to be a disadvantaged community, you have to meet 4 of the 6 areas. So with that, what we were proposing is that a project that exists in a census tract, and we would take projects that extend beyond multiple census tracts. We would take the highest ranked census tract as far as categories to score the project. But a project that has 4 disadvantaged categories or more would receive points under this disadvantaged community scoring. Obviously, these 10 points are going to have to come from somewhere. We're suggesting a scoring change to the overall score for CMAQ. We would take the 10 points from the air quality cost effectiveness score. So taking that from 60 to 50 points, and the equity score would essentially move from 10 to 20. For TAP, we would take the 10 additional points out of market for facility, which is looking at population and employment density around the proposed bicycle facility, and then also another 5 points from the safety and attractiveness score. So this is what it would look like. With that, I would like to open it up for questions and discussion, and I would like to, if Sonali Tandon, if you're from CTA, if you're on the call, if you would address the committee with some of the stuff that you've discovered when exploring the disadvantaged community criteria.
Thanks, Doug, and thanks for the opportunity to provide comment on the proposed CMAQ scoring methodology. CTA would like to thank CMAP for addressing one of our comments that we presented to this committee last year about the additional consideration to the equity in project evaluation. We welcome the change to increase equity scoring and adding disadvantaged community criteria. However, as we have looked into the proposed USDOT TAC tool for evaluating the disadvantaged community criteria, we have made some observations on what this national level tool means when it is applied to our region that we would like to share today. There are some unanticipated outcomes when we looked at individual tracts. For example, the 2 census tracts that contain the Allgill Gardens and the Golden Gate community, which we know has public housing and low-income housing and are clearly disadvantaged, do not show up as historically disadvantaged because they do not hit 4 of the 6 indicators. They only hit 3. And one of the indicators that they don't hit is health disadvantage. And we know that there are significant health concerns in this community. So we are concerned about the underlying data source that is used here, which I understand is census, but this just doesn't meet what we expect to see there. And another observation that we made is that the economic disadvantage criteria doesn't appear sensitive enough to differentiate between mixed income and extremely low income census tracts. Because as you mentioned, Doug, this is 50th percentile, this is national level, so there isn't much differentiation at the regional level between census tracts. And most of the region doesn't even score on the resiliency criteria. While this tool may work at the national level, it does not seem to translate very well at the local or regional context. So if CMAP has the flexibility on how to use the tool or look at alternative options, perhaps you can create more sensitive indicators for the region using the underlying data. And finally, CMAP is proposing to score 10 points if a census tract scores on all 6 categories. Our initial analysis indicated that none of the census tracts in the CMAP region would score on all 6 categories. This means that none of the projects would score full 10 on 10. and the highest score would likely be 7 on 10. So we would just be leaving 3 points on the table that none of the projects would get. So we would like, based on this initial investigation, we would like to request that CMAP further investigates the usage of this tool for CMAQ, underlying data sources, as well as the scoring to ensure that they're accurate and how they apply to the regions such that there are no unintended consequences. Thank you.
Thanks, Sonali. CMAP staff are in agreement that we need to take this back and take a closer look again, and maybe potentially come up with something different. But with that said, I still would like to hear your thoughts as a committee that could help guide us further as we look at this. So does anybody from the committee have any comments they would like to share?
Sorry, getting off mute. This is Jeff from CDOT. I just, want to second Sonali's points. I think we agree with the intention of this the scoring mechanism, but these are some, it seems like there's some shortcomings here with the proposed approach. But hopefully we can find another way to to achieve what we're trying to achieve here, but one that maybe be more accurate or more effective at getting to the criteria that we want.
Thanks, Jeff. Mark, did I see you raise your hand?
Yeah, I talked to Sonali a little bit about this morning, and it took me sort of a second time hearing it to really fully understand it and dig into it. But I think maybe the issue is going to be that all the projects are going to end up with the same number of points in this category or something like that. So if we're going to go to the trouble of adding it, we got to find some way to differentiate between projects so that there's a variety of scores. So anyhow, I think that's possible, maybe with some reconsideration of the thresholds that are used in that DAC tool.
Yeah, and I agree. I don't think we ever looked at every single licenses. I mean, we played around with the tool and looked at it, but never thought about that in the overall scoring. So we want to take a more look at that, and maybe also look at what other potential ways we might be able to measure this as well, besides just the DAC tool, which USDOT has admit that this is a preliminary tool. They're kind of rolling this out as they can. So we chose it because we felt it best aligned with the Justice for Initiative. We may have to demonstrate how we are addressing that with both the TAP and the CMAQ programs. So we felt using the tool that USDOT is going to measure us by would be helpful. But we agree the shortcomings may not be worth it. So with that, is there any other comments or questions? I would add that we're not, I know it was that we were moving for approval of this today. Like I said, we're not ready. We'd like to pull that back. So with that, we'll move on to the next agenda item, which is business. Staff does not have any other business to bring before the committee today. Is there anything else the committee members would like to bring up? Yeah, Mark.
Yeah, Doug, I gave a little report to you on a couple of our major projects that are CMAQ funded. I thought I'd just share some of that with the committee real quickly. I'm working on 2 projects that are CMAQ funded that goes back a ways. One is the interagency transit signage. We implemented that at 19 locations and reported on that about a year or 2 ago. And we had some remaining funds, and we're using that right now. We're designing interagency signs for another 21 locations. Most of those are in the city of Chicago. There's a few in suburban Cook County, and we will hope to start implementing those signs, installing those signs next year at some of those locations, and then other locations will have to wait until some ongoing or pending metro projects are completed. Again, I think all those communities almost all of them were in critical need areas. That's kind of like the equity scores in disadvantaged communities. That was just a slightly different way that we looked at those. So that we're moving along on that. Second program I wanted to report on is the Transit Signal Priority Program, regional program. We're working with PACE and CTA on that, as well as CDOT and IDOT. We have been working on that a long time. PACE is moving very quick after some delays initially. PACE is moving along very quickly on that. They have implemented TSP on Milwaukee Avenue a couple of years ago. They're mostly done implementing it on Des Plaines Avenue corridor between Evanston and O'Hare Airport. They're currently implementing it on portions of Roosevelt Road and 147th Street. And by the end of next year, they should be able to implement TSP on another handful of corridors. I might miss one here, but CMAQ Road, Cicero, Halsted, 159th, I might have missed one there, 95th Street also. CTA and CDOT had previously implemented TSP on Western Avenue and South Ashland Avenue. They are currently in the middle of a design process for transit signal priority and traffic signal modernization on portions of central portions and northern portions of Ashland Avenue in the city. And that's taken a while because there's a lot of the traffic signal equipment is very ancient on some portions of that. So that's taken a lot longer than they anticipated. So that is the status of those two CMAQ funded programs. I wanted to report on.
Thanks for the update, Mark. Anybody else from the committee have anything else? All right, well, hearing none, we'll move on to public comment. Does anybody in the audience wish to address the committee today? All right, I'm not seeing anybody unmuting themselves, so we're going to move on and assume that no one wants to talk to the committee today. Next meeting is scheduled for December 1st. It's a little less than a month away. Hopefully we'll be able to wrap up materials for the next call for projects, which we haven't scheduled a date yet for when that'll be released, but Cam and I are still looking through calendars and trying to get things, what we might be able to do, but it should be early January with the close of the call for projects in early March. So with that, I don't see any other business. Do I have a motion for adjournment?
So moved, Ricker.
Thank you. A second?
Second, Schmidt.
Thank you, Chris. All those in favor say, we'll just do a voice vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you.